Bitcoin Matters.
This week, Beautyon and Shaine will discuss the legitimacy of KYC AML regulations and whether they are applicable to Bitcoin. Okay, Akin, what is KYC AML?
KYC AML are in fact two things. The first part is Know Your Customer, which has its origins in 2001 after the attacks of September the 11th, where the state, through the Patriot Act in the United States, tried to find out where money is coming from and going to in an attempt to stop the funding of terrorism. Now, that's the origin of that part. The other part is anti-money laundering, and that goes further back to the 1930s, when the United States was in the middle of a war against alcohol producers when prohibition was in force. So we see both of these two methods of controlling people came out of criminality. They don't come out of a requirement that serves ordinary people. They're both the creation of the state to help them with crime. Now, we know that the vast majority of people who are transacting with money, whether it's online or offline, do so perfectly normally and legally. Their intents and the outcomes are not detrimental to society. It's a tiny fraction of transactions that are used in criminal enterprises or that move around the proceeds of criminal enterprises. So what these two laws do is penalize the law-abiding so that they can attempt to interdict the law-breaking. Now, we know also that these laws actually don't work. Criminals are very, very clever. They're able to get around all these regulations, and they do so all the time. So what these laws do is impose a burden on the market. They impose a burden on ordinary people that doesn't serve anybody's aims. But of course, if your aim is to spy on everybody, these two laws are very, very good. And they use these laws to control political enemies and do all sorts of other things that have nothing to do with the protection of the public, nothing to do with stopping crime. Indeed, these laws cannot stop crime. They can only theoretically detect it after it's happened. So crime prevention as a pretext for these measures is absolutely worthless.
Got it. So KYC AML is used primarily in banking, no?
That's right. And it doesn't have anything to do with software, which is what Bitcoin is. So we can talk about databases. We can talk about text messaging with WhatsApp. None of these activities have any crossover with banking or KYC AML. But because people mistakenly believe that Bitcoin has something to do with money, there's a very small contingent of people, mostly from a legal background, who think that their perspective on what Bitcoin is should be superimposed on it. They don't try and superimpose KYC AML on Twitter or on Facebook or on WhatsApp. And when you confront these people and ask them why not, they essentially just shrug their shoulders. And that's after their eyes have glazed over when you're talking about the details of how these things work. So it isn't rational to all of a sudden impose one set of laws that has nothing to do with the activity of Bitcoin and Bitcoin at its nature and money. There's no reason to conflate them. This is a result of people bringing their own thinking to the table. That's a result of their occupation. And people do this all the time with different, people from different occupations will bring their thinking to Bitcoin and try and superimpose their ideas on it. So, for example, people whose business is governance, they'll say because Bitcoin doesn't have any governance, they'll say Bitcoin requires governance. We know how to do governance, so we'll start a foundation to govern Bitcoin. Lawyers and bankers will say, There is no KYC AML in Bitcoin. We know how to do that. So we're going to bring that to Bitcoin. So everybody tries to bring to Bitcoin what their occupation says is required for an activity. And the vast majority of these people have it absolutely wrong. And Bitcoin does not require a foundation. And certainly KYC AML should not be applied to it.
So KYC AML is wrong in your opinion because it requires too much information from the customer.
It's not my opinion. It is actually wrong. Especially in a country like the United States that has a constitution. Now, if you're going to apply KYC AML to Bitcoin, you have to apply it to every single database software or suite that's available. And all the people using those software suites should also have to apply KYC AML to every single activity that they use with those databases. Now, if someone comes up to you and says, no, that's not the case, they have to explain why not. Because Bitcoin is a database just like Microsoft Excel is. So what they're trying to say, what they would have to say is that you can do anything with a database except for this one thing. This one activity with a database is a special activity. It's not just record keeping. And we're going to make a special set of legislation that applies only to that. Now, that cannot happen in the United States because there's a written constitution where everybody has rights that are clearly delineated. And we've already been through this arguments in the 1990s with PGP. PGP was classed as munitions by the United States government to stop it from getting out of the country and getting into the hands of the bad guys. Now, PGP is a piece of encryption software that allows two people to communicate in private. The government said this software, which is actually text, cannot be exported. So the developers behind it printed out the source code, which is unambiguously text, and then exported it legally because they have the right to write things down onto a piece of paper and to do whatever they want with it. That's what the First Amendment means. So Bitcoin is software. Its source code can be printed out. Its messages can be printed out. And all those messages are forms of text and writing, which are protected speech. There's nothing in the Constitution that says speech is only protected when it's written by the hand of a person. Text generated by a computer is also protected speech. We know that from the Fields Amendment PGP case. So when you look at the facts of this matter, what Bitcoin actually is in its nature, looking directly at it and not analyzing it by analogy, you can see that Bitcoin is text, first of all, and secondly, that it's protected speech under the United States Constitution. And all that's required for Bitcoin to be protected is for one sane country to apply a written constitution correctly to it, and then the whole world will change. That country is going to be the United States. Somebody's going to go to court over this to make sure that the rights of Americans are protected. And things like BitLicense are going to be struck off the law books. They're going to be abolished because they violate the fundamental rights of American citizens. And it doesn't matter what people say. It doesn't matter what people claim. It doesn't matter what analogies they use to try and explain what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin has a very specific nature. It works in a very specific way. And when you clear away all the cobwebs and nonsense that people talk about it and get right down to the functional parts of it, you can see it's indistinguishable from every other piece of software, all of which are already established by case law to be protected speech.
That's a really brilliant perspective, in my opinion, and not a lot of people talk about it that way. Everybody, like you say, thinks of it as money or what have you. Thinking of it as a form of speech, that is a pretty revolutionary idea. So then when you have Bitcoin, obviously you can move it anywhere. So don't you think KYC AML is pointless even if it were quote-unquote ethical?
Exactly right. KYC AML is only useful at the point where the first conversion from fiat into Bitcoin takes place. And it's useful only in that you can identify who has changed their money into Bitcoin. 10 seconds after that happens, that Bitcoin can be moved to any wallet anywhere in the world. So it literally is of no use to anyone to take down the details of somebody who's converted $20 into Bitcoin, because that Bitcoin can then will literally disappear into the ether. And so the burdens that are put on companies to do this are not only unethical, but they're not rational either, because it only takes one step for that Bitcoin to disappear. And so what these jurisdictions really need to be thinking about is what is the end game after many, many years of converting fiat into Bitcoin. There's going to be a lot of Bitcoin use. Bitcoin to Bitcoin transactions are going to be happening very frequently, on the order of millions of times a day. And do these jurisdictions want to be the beginning and end point of Bitcoin transactions? Because the corporations that are going to be running the companies that facilitate this through their software wallets are all going to be paying corporation tax. Now, they can pay that corporation tax in any jurisdiction all over the world. Do you want to be collecting taxes from Bitcoin businesses or not? We already know that the Bit license has made New York City a place where people are not willing to go to run their Bitcoin business. And of course, that's the whole state of New York. So these laws have a real world effect on where businesses will operate and where taxes are going to be paid. So thinking into the future, and you don't have to look very far to understand this is true. In the future, all Bitcoin transactions are going to be coming from one place to another and terminating in some jurisdiction, as long as they're going Bitcoin to fiat or fiat to Bitcoin. And so you need to be aware that some place is going to capture the businesses where this is going to take place. And if you put any barriers in front of corporations that are performing these functions, then you're going to lose out. And I got a perfect example in the case of blockchain.info, which used to be QCOS Incorporated in the United Kingdom, a United Kingdom corporation. Now it's another corporation operating in Lithuania. So even though those blockchain.info has offices in the UK, a programming staff in the UK, it's very in the middle of shortage to trying to turn to tech city. The corporation is incorporated in a foreign country. So that means that's where they're paying taxes, not in the UK. This is going to happen again and again and again. And a country like the UK has a lot of programming talent in it. So really, if they're going to make use of that talent and they're going to leverage it and cause their tech city to be a significant place in the software ecosystem, they need to allow businesses to operate here on a sensible basis. And if they bring in some kind of legislation like a bit license into the UK, the corporations will flee here and the software will be developed here, but the taxes will be paid in another jurisdiction. Now, QCOS folded and blockchain moved to another jurisdiction without a bit license being legislated in the UK. Just imagine if they try and do something like that. It's going to be very, very, very bad for them. So they need to understand what software is, what software business is, and that developers can be literally anywhere in the world working on a software project. There's there's a company in Chicago, I believe, that does collaboration software. Apparently they only meet once a year and no two developers work in the same country. They're in different time zones, different continents, and it's an extremely profitable and successful software company. This is the future of how software companies are going to operate, and the state has to adapt to how these companies operate. because I can tell you right now, as long as there's any jurisdiction where the regulations are reasonable, that's where everybody's going to go to incorporate. And then they're going to run their operations from their wherever offices they can find that are pleasant, or even inside their own houses.
Wow, fascinating. So in other words, just so I understand you correctly, I think what you're saying is that the future of a corporation, the corporation itself, the entity is evolving in reaction to, technology like Bitcoin. And so naturally, laws governing corporations will have to evolve in reaction to the changes we're seeing in business. Is that what we're getting at?
I don't think that the corporations are evolving. What's actually changing is the understanding of entrepreneurs that they don't have to be in any particular place as an incorporation. For example, they don't have to have the incorporation in the same jurisdiction where the offices are that does the work. If you're a car manufacturer, you might have to have an incorporation right where the cars are manufactured because it's a different kind of business. But with software, it's not like that. So this is the change in organization. It's very flexible, it's dynamic, and because there's nothing needs to be moved around, you can shop for the best jurisdiction where you're going to be experiencing the least amount of hassle. And of course, the jurisdictions that want to be collecting taxes from Bitcoin operations or Bitcoin businesses are going to be thinking very hard about how they can make themselves attractive so that they can take maybe 10% of a Bitcoin business's operations. Now, you look at a company like BitMEX, which has a throughput of billions of dollars regularly. Many jurisdictions would be happy to take 5% of BitMEX's turnover. To them, that would be an absolute fortune. So they will do whatever they need to do to make themselves attractive to a company like BitMEX. And we're even seeing this phenomenon in companies like Amazon in the United States. Different states have been competing for the new Amazon fulfillment center. They put on presentations, offer generous terms for them to go and incorporate. So with Bitcoin, the people who run the businesses actually have a choice. And so the dynamic is inverted. It's not the corporations that have to accommodate the state. It's the state that has to accommodate the incorporations. And that's very beneficial for everybody. It's beneficial for the people who run the businesses. It's beneficial for the people who use the businesses, because if the administrative costs are lower, then the prices that the companies can offer to the users, and the costs are going to be lower. So this is good for everybody. And then, of course, your socialist will say this is a race to the bottom. But if the race to the bottom means the prices are going down to the bottom, the costs of running things are going down to the bottom, that's good for everybody.
So let me ask you, you mentioned Amazon. Why are Amazon and iTunes gift cards not subject to KYC AML?
This is a very, very good question. When you go into a store and you buy an Amazon gift card, you hand over cash or pay with a credit card, you get the card, and then you go back, scratch it off, and then redeem it for money that you can spend on Amazon or iTunes. There is no reason why KYC AML should apply to Amazon cards, and there's no reason why they should apply to Bitcoin either. Essentially, Amazon and iTunes are running an ecosystem, a software ecosystem, where their cards are redeemable for a service. Bitcoin is exactly the same, only that the network isn't owned by any particular person. When you go and buy Bitcoin through an ethical service like Azteco, then you get access to the Bitcoin network, which is identical in form and function to the Amazon voucher network, where you can buy things on Amazon using one of their cards. You get an account You redeem the card that Amazon sold to you, and then you can use that money to buy things on their website. It's exactly the same. So when you ask people what's the difference between an Amazon gift card and Bitcoin, they scratch their head because they don't understand what Bitcoin is. If your starting point with Bitcoin is that it's money, then you can't make the connection between an Amazon gift card or an iTunes gift card and Bitcoin, when in fact they're exactly the same thing. They're both two software systems with a different architecture, admittedly, but they're in nature identical. So if the KYC AML fanatics insist that Bitcoin be subject to KYC AML, then they have to be consistent. It should also apply equally to Amazon and all the other gift cards that are out there. Did you know that people in the southern part of the United States and Mexico use gift cards in lieu of money? Some of them are paid in Walmart gift cards instead of money because they can send those numbers to their relatives who can then buy things with those gift cards once they receive them. So if you're going to be consistent, and that's always a good thing, you've got to apply the rules consistently. And that means, in this case, that Bitcoin should not be subject at any time to KYC AML.
So every week, we're going to give listeners a chance to send us questions, and we're going to try to answer them. So this week, we have our first question, and Twitter user @CBreastjar sent us the following question. How far will governments go in the execution of trying to get control over Bitcoin?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. The real nub of this is, what can they do to control Bitcoin? And if we look at the history of software, we know that the government could not control internet relay chat. We know that they couldn't control torrents where people were sharing movies. Now, those two ways of sharing information are essentially indistinguishable from Bitcoin. Once you have an IRC client or a BitTorrent client, you can connect with other peers and say whatever you want. Now, people are saying things that are usable as a form of money. So all of the effects you saw with BitTorrent are going to be replicated in Bitcoin. And that means it's going to be unstoppable. The RIAA and MPAA totally failed to stop people from torrenting movies. And as they tried to roll out technical measures to stop it, the software developers were always 10 steps ahead of them. And now we have magnet links, for example, which make finding content through torrents very, very easy. So the government can put people in jail. They can pass laws. They can do whatever they like, but they'll never be able to stop people from sharing text online. And that's what Bitcoin is. That's what BitTorrent is. And it doesn't matter what laws they pass, how they try and frighten people. We know from history that it's not going to work. So how far will they go? They'll probably go as far as they can. It's less likely, though, that they'll go to the limits that they've done with the RIAA and MPAA if the people who are on board with Bitcoin peers, are your Goldman Sachs or your Guardian newspaper, New York Times. If they start to collect micropayments, in the case of the newspapers, for page views using Bitcoin, and that would be on the Bitcoin Lightning Network, there's no way that they're going to turn against Bitcoin. Our narratives will become their narratives. They'll do everything they can to spread Bitcoin onto every phone because that's going to be their bread and butter. So it's very important that we get these people on board. We get these people taking microtransactions for their content so that they become our allies and we have a common cause.
Great, great. So actually, he had a second part to the question. The second part is, will government's actions get worse when stronger fiat currencies start to inflate?
I think it's inevitable. The question is, when is it going to happen? Not if it's going to happen. Now, as long as the state has the power to levy taxes, there will always be a demand for their money. We know this through the example of the tally stick, which lasted for 724 years, which is essentially just a stick cut in two with a zigzag in it. Now, the government was able to keep that as a form of money, even though it's a piece of wood, for centuries. You must never underestimate the power the state has to compel people to pay taxes. And so as long as it's required to pay dollars as taxes, there's going to be a demand for dollars or for euros or for sterling or for any other fiat currency. This, however, doesn't have anything to do with Bitcoin. And what they'll have to do is to pull and push on the levers to make sure that the amount of fiat that they're asking for in taxes doesn't have a negative effect on the value of their fiat currency. But essentially, they're going to have to absorb the fiat currency back or face its complete demolishment, its complete destruction. It's a very difficult problem. Luckily, now they have some very powerful computers that can help them make those calculations. But that's what they're going to have to do. If even a third of the people on Earth who are economically active all switch to Bitcoin, it's going to have an effect on the fiat currencies. Eventually, all these countries are going to be taking Bitcoin as a payment method for the settlement of tax bills. There's a canon in Switzerland that is already doing this. So eventually, they are going to start taking taxes in Bitcoin. And so there's going to be a nice, smooth transition away from fiat and into Bitcoin. I don't think there's going to be a road warrior scenario and a disaster looming in the future. We've seen in Zimbabwe, the dollar basically going up in smoke, and there wasn't a revolution there or any kind of social unrest. They just started using another kind of money. So fiat currencies have gone out of existence in the past, and it doesn't have to be disaster or Mad Max as the result of it.
Okay, so we want to thank Twitter user BreastJar for sending in your question. BreastJar is the winner of this week's weekly Azteco voucher. So every week we will select a listener's question, and whoever is selected will receive an Azteco voucher. So please send us your questions. You can find us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @Bitcoin_Matters.